Welcome to the Playground Talks podcast, a podcast for busy parents who want to own their parenting style and develop a stronger sense of how to handle challenging situations. I am Tamia Friat, your host and a mother of three. In this podcast, I will interview psychologists, practitioners, behavioral therapists, teachers, and other experts about topics that bother all of us as parents, so you can get both the parenting principles and practical aspects that resonate with you, give you confidence and joy. Hey parents, I hope your week is going well. Today we have the first talk about habit. And just before we start, I want to remind you to take just a second and to rate the show. This will be really helpful. So our guest today is Michelle Cole. Michelle is being awarded as a Specialist Leader of Education by the National College of Teaching in 2015. And if you wonder why is she passionate about supporting educators and families with integrating well-being and healthy habits into her daily lives, we'll take you 10 years ago in her journey when she was about 30 and she had a cancer. And the cancer was a wake-up call for Michelle that she needed to do something differently. So she earned a diploma in positive psychology and deepened her knowledge of habits and routines has helped her to support not only herself, but also hundreds of student educators and families. In addition, 3 years ago, she and her sister Helen created Calmer Kids, which has helped over 500 families to connect and learn well-being through yoga, mindfulness, and journaling. So in this conversation, we'll talk about what does habit mean, what's the difference between habit and routine, and how you may use well-being and yoga in your day-to-day life. So I hope you'll get a lot from this conversation as much as I did. And let's get started.
Hey, Michelle. So nice to see you. How are you?
Hi, Tammy. Good to see you too. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to share with us your knowledge and from your experience around habits. And I want to start with the very basic of what is habits definition.
Okay, look, so a habit is defined as a routine of behaviour or a usual manner of behaviour is how it's defined in the dictionary. The key that we look at when we're studying it is that it happens with little conscious thought. So it's just done automatically. So, for example, when you sneeze, I would imagine you cover your mouth. It just happens. Brushing our teeth becomes a habit. But when we get up in the morning, we don't brush our teeth. It feels yucky. So that's become a really ingrained habit because for most of us, and I'd imagine listeners listening, we've done it from a very, very young age. So you've done it for a number of years. The same as brushing teeth before going to bed. It's a habit. You do it without thinking. No matter how tired you are, you go and you brush your teeth before finishing off.
So you touched the word routine. Is there any difference between routine and habit?
Yeah, look, the main difference is that a routine requires more conscious effort, whereas the habit kind of happens and has like little conscious choice. If we don't feel it, it feels awkward. Whereas a routine is something that we can bring into our lives and we can follow that routine and have the context clues that make that routine really easy to follow. And it can actually come and build into a habit. So James Clear, who's one of my favourite authors on this topic, in his book Atomic Habits, he actually talks about the 1% gain with habits and how starting small is really, really powerful. So often when we want to integrate a new routine or a new habit, we start big. So, right, I want to start running, so I'm going to run every day for an hour. And the reality is that being able to do that is not going to happen. And so when we don't get that reward, it stops. So we can use our routine and using our knowledge of habits to help us actually create meaningful change. So, for example, if I want to develop healthier habits in my life, a routine that I can establish for myself is when I get out of bed, I brush my teeth and I get dressed and then I go for a run. So in terms of your question, is a habit different to a routine? The routine just requires more conscious effort. But if I do it enough, it can become a habit. So sometimes if you're reading on habits, they may also be talking about routines. The two are very, very interlinked.
So I got routine. It's something that does require some mental energy. But then as we do it frequently, it becomes a habit. And at this point, like if I don't brush my teeth and it feels uncomfortable to me, that means that it's already a habit.
That's it, exactly.
And that's great news, because a lot of our listeners, I guess, are putting energy to establish those healthy routines with their children. So that's the great news. I want to go back though to when you talked about the definition of habit. What's the science behind habit? What's the mechanism of a habit in our brain?
Yeah, so basically habits are often linked with like cues. So if we use the brushing the teeth example, I get up in the morning, that's my cue, I'm going to go and brush my teeth. So, and we can use that when we're starting new habits. So if we're trying to integrate some more mindful movement or yoga or mindfulness with our kids, so we have listeners with Karma Kids that are signed up to our online platform, Karma Kids Online. And what our subscribers do is they try and do it at the same time on same days. So it might not be every day, but they might do it, say, a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday. And they'll try and develop it. We work with them to try and develop it so that it happens at the same point in the day. So, for example, if one of our clients, the kids come home, they're quite high in that window of tolerance, school can be quite challenging for a lot of children because it's a lot of focus, a lot of mental energy. It's very common for kids to come home and suddenly they can't hold it together anymore, which is why as parents, sometimes they experience the meltdown as soon as they get home because they feel safe enough to do that. So what we can do is we can use our knowledge of habit cues to help us start to develop that behaviour and gradually change that behaviour. So, for example, one of our clients, 2 kids that come in, their previous habit was the bags got shoved in the hall and they went through into the lounge and they watched TV, which often caused some arguments. I want to watch this, no, I want to watch this. So we work with them to say, okay, well, how can we use this habit? Because the parents really wanted to bring some more mindfulness and yoga into their routine to help them self-regulate and almost help create that distinction between the end of the school day and the beginning of their family evening. They wanted to improve that family connection time. So what we did is we actually used the cue that was already there so that they come home from school, the bags go in the hall, they go into the lounge, but on the TV, they've actually got up on the TV, the Karma Kids Online. So they're still doing that same migration of hall, lounge, TV, but rather than it being completely free choice of, we're going to watch cartoons, I want to watch this on Netflix, I want to watch this YouTube rubbish, actually they've got something that's up there and good to go. And the way our Karma Kids platform works is that there's different activities or videos or audios for days of the week. So for this family, what really works for them, on a Monday, they come in, click on Monday week 1, and that's what they play. If it's Wednesday, they go on Wednesday. And sometimes they do more than it. Sometimes the kids will come home and say, I really liked what we did yesterday. Can we do it again? Or can we see what's on Tuesday? And that then is becoming a habit for that family. And what's really lovely, and the feedback we're getting from them, is that the mum is no longer having to, when they come in, have a battle of the choice of, do you want to do yoga or do you want to watch cartoons? Because that choice it's still the same context and the same cue, but gradually it's changing it.
Well, that's great.
And of course, one of the key things with habit setting and habit building is that there needs to be some kind of reward. So you've got the cue, you've got the routine. So normally it's the routine that becomes a habit. So for example, in this example, kids come home from school, bags in the hall. The routine is doing yoga to Karma Kids Online, actually actively doing some movement, some self-regulation, some breathing, mindfulness. And so for these kids, the reward for them is not only do they then feel good in their body, because we all know how good it feels when we move mindfully in our body. Our nervous system goes into the rest and digest place, but they get that reward. And then after that, they get 20 minutes free time on their TV. So it's built in. So that's just like a really simple example of where an old habit can be adapted. Mm-hmm. What is worth saying as well, though, is that it's really challenging to change habits. And it's just as easy to gradually fall into less healthy habits than it is to integrate new habits. So even, for example, I'm having a stressful time at work, the way I cope with that is I'm going to come home and pour a glass of wine. And that becomes, for the first day, a one-off. And then it happens the second day that, the same issues have been happening. You do it for the second day, you do it for the third day, fourth day, and suddenly that is your habit really for your coping mechanism. When I was deputy principal back in the UK a number of years ago, that was a big part of my habit. I would finish work, had a very big job, ran a school with 500 students and 80 staff, and I would finish work, I'd go to the gym or go to the stables, and I'd come home and have a glass of wine. And it was fine, I was only having one glass of wine, but I've been very conscious to since remove that part of my habit setting, because I don't want to be drinking a glass of wine every night. That doesn't actually align with my long-term health goals.
So I got the mechanism, which is the cue, the trigger, and then the habit or the routine, and then the reward. And so that's one thing that it's manageable, because once you understand what's your cues, you just need to be aware of what do you do as soon as you have that trigger. And I want to ask you, how do you establish new habits?
So it is through that routine, through the routine and the cues. So James Clear talks about the 1% game. So we can often be really, really tempted to try and make massive changes. But the reality is that if we try and make massive changes, it's not sustainable and we're not going to get the reward straight away. And therefore, we're pretty simple creatures underneath all the complexity. If we're not getting that regular reward, then we're less likely to continue that habit. So if I set that goal, if I set my 1% improvement as really quite small, 1% gain and attainable, I'm more likely to stick to it. So last week, I've actually been travelling with work. I was down in Canberra for a week. So my normal routine and my normal habit is I wake up and I take the dog to the beach. So we go out and we have a really good walk. We're out for 45 minutes, an hour. And that's a really great, healthy habit in my day-to-day life that helps set me up really well for the day. So, of course, being down in Canberra, there's no beach, there's no dog. So I very consciously, on my trip down there, thought, well, what can I do? How am I going to transfer my normal habit and routine so that I don't completely lose that when I'm away? So there's no beach, but there was a pool. So what I did is I made a conscious effort every morning to get up at 6 o'clock and go for a swim. Now, I didn't have heaps of time because we met early as a team at 7 o'clock each morning. So I didn't have time to go for a swim for an hour. And I could have very easily have gone, well, there's no point. I can't do 45 minutes or an hour exercise, so I'm not going to do anything. But because of that 1% gain, it's the first time with us away as a newly developed team. I started small, really attainable, said to myself, I'm going to swim for half an hour. And because it was attainable, because I got that immediate reward, because it was a small goal that I'd set, and therefore it was very achievable, as soon as I'd done that half an hour, I felt really set up for the day. So whereas I could have said, no, I need to be outside, I need to run still, I need to be outside for 45 minutes, an hour. It was 3 degrees in the morning when I was waking up. There's no way that I would have been sticking to it.
So you're just saying to start with this small steps. That's key for success to establish new habits.
Absolutely. Start small is really, really important.
And also be intentional and aware of what the reward you want to achieve, because that kind of motivates you.
Absolutely. And look, exercise actually gives us its own reward because of the natural happy chemicals that are released when we do it. However, we can also build in other rewards for ourselves. People can set themselves goals to go, okay, well, if I do 3 workouts a week, then on Saturday and Sunday, I can have a sleep in and not have to do any. It just completely depends on what people have that work for them. For another family that I'm working with, I'm with Karma Kids. So we have a monthly overview that has the month's activities and mindfulness and yoga. So their goal they've set for themselves is this family have got really busy routines. They just want to do 2 days a week. And for them, they try and make it on a Tuesday and a Thursday because that works with their other schedule. And if they hit both of those days, then on Friday as a family, they have pizza night. And actually, the reality is that they were already having pizza night, but they've built it in. So as a family, collectively, they go and the kids are really engaged to go, okay, well, we missed it on Tuesday, so we're going to do Wednesday, Thursday. So being able to really build in that reward, it's quite often when people are setting new habits and new goals, it's really good pairing up with someone.
To be accountable for each other.
That's it. And the great thing, parents listening to this who are wanting to do this for their children, kids are very open about what works for them in terms of rewards. Some kids just love stickers, and some kids will literally be really, really rewarded. So when I talk about Karma Kids chart, They literally love having a sticker as part of that reward for doing it. Ideally, what you want to try and do, though, is move from external, extrinsic rewards into that intrinsic reward. But the great thing is internal. And the good thing is that the more we do these healthy habits, the happier we feel, the more healthy we feel.
Yeah, so as the child grow up, those external reward, he just grow out of it because he gets the reward. For example, when he work out, then he feels good and he feels more relaxed. So
yeah, exactly. There's a brilliant area of neuroscience that looks at neuroplasticity. And so that basically shows us, and there's a really great line graph that shows that the younger we are, the easier change is to create, which is why building healthy habits and self-regulation tools from a young age is one of the best gifts we can give our kids, and one of the best things that teachers can support students with. Because for many of us, and I'm sure, for listeners who are listening, many of us have tried to and have integrated healthier habits age 30 or maybe age 35 or age 40, and it can be really quite hard to make those changes. Whereas if we can teach habits from a younger age, it's really, really powerful. Part of positive psychology talks around, there's kind of two areas of well-being. There's subjective well-being, which is almost like your more kind of surface level well-being. So that's like your quick fix. How do I feel now? What am I going to do to feel good? So, for example, it might be go to the beach, it might be yoga, it might be a massage. So it's all the things we do to make me feel good right now. It might be connection with friends. Then underpinning that, though, and this is what kind of many people kind of end up actually leaving till last, because the subjective well-being is much easier to focus on. With psychological well-being, it's the underpinning, it's deeper, and it's linked to our meaning, our purpose, and our values. And that part of well-being actually can take some work. And habits are very, very much situated in that. Habits are an incredible and really powerful tool for our psychological well-being. And we can use them to either help us or actually hinder us with our psychological well-being. So, for example, if I've got myself into a habit that I don't get up when my alarm gets off because it's dark outside and it's winter and it's cold. And so every time my alarm goes off, when I would normally exercise, I sleep in for longer and I snooze it and I get up at the last possible minute. And I've done that once. I've done it the next day. I've done it the next day. And suddenly all of a sudden I've done it for a month. In terms of my meaning, my purpose, my values, my long-term healthy habits and routines for my well-being, it's actually hindering my well-being because we know that our bodies and our brains need at least 30 minutes of exercise a day to keep us happy. Our prefrontal cortex needs that to stay online. Otherwise, we go more into much more limbic thinking. Whereas I can use that and I can say, okay, so what's my meaning, my purpose, my values? So one of my values may be that I really value my health. And I'm going to really make a conscious effort to when that alarm goes off and my first initial thought is, I don't want to get up. I think the bigger gain of getting up and going to make that 1% change and going for that walk or that run or that yoga class or whatever it is. Does that make sense? So habits actually are fundamental for creating well-being habits for us, like for us and for our kids.
So there is short-term reward that I'm searching for something that will make me feel right here, right now. And then there are the long-term reward, which habits typically fall into that category because we need to be more intentional of what we are eating. Because obviously when I'm eating ice cream, this is my weakness, then at the moment I feel really pleased with the taste.
That's it.
So how do you, especially with kids, how can you transfer that kind of understanding and help them create that kind of habits that they don't necessarily understand the reward at the moment?
I think it's by making that reward really apparent and really conscious, and by making what you're trying to integrate really small and achievable. Like a real life example. So I've noticed that since being in my new job, I've got less time for yoga, I've got less time for mindfulness, and I haven't got as much space in my day-to-day day to do those things that help me practice mindfulness as part of my day-to-day life. So I have two choices with that. I can either say, oh, this is rubbish, I don't get to yoga every day anymore, I'm not doing mindfulness, I'm just going to leave it and I'm just not going to do it anymore. Or I can say, okay, well, how can I integrate this into my day-to-day life? what do I do every day? I still get a coffee in the morning. So one of my things that I really enjoy getting a takeaway coffee. That's kind of for me a real treat, how I start my day. So, okay, well, can I integrate mindfulness into how I drink my coffee? Yeah, I can, because mindfulness can look in many different ways. So although I'm not sat on my yoga mat at the yoga studio, cross-legged, it's not mindfulness in the typical way. I can have my cup and I can hold it mindfully and I can really notice how it feels in my hand and I can be really present when I'm drinking it and I can take a small sip and really savor it. So I can start really, really small. And the same goes for helping our kids. And it's that immediate reward of, hey, what do you notice when you do that? And that's one of the best things we can be doing with our kids when we're trying these and exploring these tools is empowering them and just saying, so how did that feel? What did you notice? Because the great thing with healthy habits is that your body actually tells you how good it is for you. If we listen to our bodies, and kids are really good at listening to their bodies, if we do it and immediately check in and go, how does that feel? As long as we've done it within our realms of fitness and capability, etc., 9 times out of 10, it feels good.
I'm getting it. Like, you need to ask after your child practiced that routine. You could just make him be more aware of it and just ask, so how do you feel about that? And that kind of where he started to realizing that that's what really makes him good.
Yeah. Look, so on that, so in teaching, we call that metacognition. So it is literally just bringing that awareness to what they're learning, which then empowers them to take ownership of it, which isn't to do with habits, but it's how we learn. If we own it and we're not passively doing it. So like for any parent wanting to, for example, support their kids to use Karma Kids online or to do whatever, if you just tell them, they might do it. But if you can really empower them to notice how it feels, to reflect, that's called metacognition. So that is actually really taking on board, what am I learning? How does this feel? Why would I want to do this again? So they literally like engaging cognitively with it, as well as having a physical reaction. And then you've got your mind and your body connection, which is what we need to create proper health and well-being.
That's great. It's like moving from I'm trying to guide my kid to the place where he's not needing the guide anymore. He's responsible to do those kind of routine. And that's a successful process. That means that he's independent in that specific area.
Exactly. When I was teaching, I was in a school last year and I was doing some teaching. I've been in leadership for about 8 years and wanted to kind of get back on the tools, to just go back on the ground and see if what I was saying and leading and I guess preaching about was still relevant. And I had a class with a huge proportion of trauma, some very extreme behaviour, some very high needs and often quite conflicting high needs. And they would come in from lunchtime, very heightened, there was often lots of conflict. And I would feel myself reacting with that also and, could feel my kind of tension rising too. And so we started to integrate mindfulness into the classroom. So we used a couple of things. We used the Smiling Mind app, which has some brilliant classroom meditations. I did some of my own meditations from Karma Kids, and we used a breathing ball. So like a Hoberman spear, which you can get from most great toy shops. And literally, they would come in after lunch and we would do 5 to 10 minutes of either belly breathing or mindfulness or movement, and just to recenter and connect with our bodies. And so to begin with, for the first week, maybe 2 weeks, I very consciously and very deliberately had planned the ones that we were going to do. I wanted to test out and see which ones they liked doing. I kind of used the ones that I liked. We reflected on how it made them feel. So, they're like, oh, yeah, I actually feel a lot better. And this is like a really quite challenging school with kids who had seen a lot already in their lives. They're year 5 kids, some of like the most like streetwise, coolest kids that I've ever worked with. And these kids were going, oh, wow, like when I lie on my back and I do belly breathing, I can really feel good. And what ended up happening, that it was a routine, but it became such a healthy habit for those kids. They would come in and sometimes, if I'd been on break on lunch duty and I'd been dealing with something and I'd come in and I forgot to do this routine, they would hold me accountable and they'd say, hey, we haven't done belly breathing yet. Can we do it? And then likewise, if something happened and one of them got triggered about something or was finding a lesson particularly hard, I had one kid, who had ADD, ADHD, he'd been suspended and he'd literally go, can I go and get the breathing ball and just take 5? Because he knew how good it felt in his body, and he knew that by self-regulating his emotions, he was then able to make a conscious choice about his behaviour and therefore about his choices, which meant that he then didn't lash out and get into trouble. And this is where the neuroplasticity is really relevant. Because they're younger, it's easier for it to integrate into their habits. Now, that's not to say that those kids will do it forevermore because we did it for a year. And that's okay, but they actually experienced what that habit was like and how it felt.
So you just touched something interesting. You actually said that being dysregulated in a certain way, like if someone is getting upset and now he's throwing stuff, that's actually a habit. And that leads us to how do you change a habit? Because what you've done with those kids is actually helping them establish new habits, new healthy habits. So how do you do that?
Well, it is that whole like trigger or cue and what happens.
And then the reward.
Exactly. And we can create new neural pathways and we can create with that new choices. However, when the dysregulation is happening, you can't teach the new habit then. Like you literally, like you actually cannot. And anyone who's ever had a child or a student tantrum in front of them and has said to them, or even a partner has said to you, us, just calm down. Like, you know, when you're in that, when you're dysregulated, that's the worst thing anyone can ever say to you. Because I'm not going to calm down. I feel angry. And that's because our prefrontal cortex, which is like the thinking, the rational part of our brain, like has flipped and is offline. When that goes offline, what happens is we go into the very limbic, which is the reptilian part of our brain. One of the main differences between my brain and my dog's brain is I have the prefrontal cortex. I have rational thinking, whereas a dog's brain, it's limbic. It's emotional. It's actually where we have our habits. Rational thinking cannot happen here. So my dog, for example, cannot rationally go, oh, look, mum's on a call with work. I'd better not grab that donut ring and go around squeaking it because that's going to be awkward. He's not going to think that. So when kids are dysregulated, their lid has flipped. We can't integrate those habits there. However, what we can do, using what we know about teaching, metacognition, habit building, is we can help children to experience how it feels when they use the regulation tools. For example, belly breathing, and the belly breathing ball is a brilliant example. 5-finger breathing is another favourite. So, you know, breathing in as you go up the finger and down and out as you go down, and then in and out and in and out. And obviously you can do that slightly slower. Or belly breathing, where you've got the belly breathing ball and you breathe in, feel your belly expand, breathe out. So using those breathing tools, what we can do is teach kids about those tools to reflect on how they feel. And then when there's a trigger, to choose that as the outcome as opposed to the old behaviour. Now, with triggers, especially when it comes to behaviour, there's different levels of trigger. So a couple of years ago, I was working as a curriculum coach at a school, and I was working with a new student who'd been expelled from 3 different schools, had a history of domestic violence in his family, really struggled with anger. So when he got angry, he'd get physical, which, was his way of keeping safe, and his lid flipped, he would lash out. He would literally go into that fight or flight response. We can't change that as a natural physiological reaction. We all have it. So what he would do is when he had a trigger, he would often go into what we call hypoarousal. So he'd disassociate, he'd shut down. Sometimes we call that freeze or fawn. And after that, it would build up and it would bubble up. And eventually he'd attack and he'd go, rah, and he'd flip tables and he'd punch kids and he'd actually hurt a teacher. So this poor kid at age 4 already had a really big file and had a lot of people judging him. But actually his behaviour was triggered by his experiences and his trauma. So we worked together. So myself and his teacher worked with him and I worked with her to understand the behaviour, because all behaviour is communication. And so we worked with him to develop his metacognition of knowing when you lose your temper or when you do that, how does that feel? Okay, it doesn't feel great. What if we were to find a way to help you manage that in a different way? Would that be something that would feel helpful? Well, yeah, I don't want to get expelled. I actually really like this school and it's really lonely. I have to make friends every time I move on. I have to make friends. And every time I meet a new teacher, they think I'm that kid that hits people. And I don't like that and it feels rubbish. And so he was really able to articulate it. So we talked with him with different strategies. And Karma Kids, we have some brain break cards. So we used some of those. And he basically identified the things that really worked for him. So he loved the belly breathing ball. He absolutely loved it. And if you have a look on the Karma Kids Instagram or Facebook, you can see pictures of kids using the ball. He loved it. And that for him, it was really kinesthetic. And he would use that to help him regulate. When he was really shut down, and often when kids are really in hyperarousal, that bigger movement can be really hard. So he also had a cushion, like in the library area. That was his safe place to go to. So we set up the cue and the routine and therefore inbuilt the reward for him. So, okay, when you feel angry, can you go here to your safe place in the corner where the library is and get your cushion and hug your cushion and hold it close. And if you need to have a little bit of movement, and when that movement's helped you get into your body and you feel better, you can get the breathing ball or do your 5-finger. And he had a picture up of those strategies. So anyway, so we worked with him with that on a few low-level triggers. And he would get triggered quite often, even in a lesson if he was finding something hard. And the teacher was brilliant at helping to remind him. The teacher aide and myself worked a lot with him developing that routine. If I feel angry, what choice are you going to make? And it was about being able to read him before that lid had flipped. So roll forward a couple of months, and we've been working on that. And the other year 4 teacher, who was lovely, but wasn't the best at communication, decided to invade the year 4 class that we were working in with the whole of her other year 4 class. So 28 kids came running into the classroom as part of an invasion for a HAS lesson, which in itself was a brilliant idea for a lesson. She wanted her children to experience the invasion. She wanted the others to experience it. It could have been a really great learning opportunity. But of course, for the little boy that we've been working with, 28 kids and a teacher running into his classroom screaming, incredibly triggering, and it could have been incredibly dangerous. It could have been incredibly dangerous for him. However, he went to freeze, and it just so happened that I was in the room, his teacher was in the room, the teacher aide was there as well, and he stopped, and we looked at him, and we pointed, and he knew exactly where to go, and he took himself off to the corner, he got his pillow, and, you know, to be fair, he really did go into disassociation. He was kind of there, and he was frozen, and the teacher aide was brilliant. She went there, she knew. She was there, like, reassured him. We got the other class and the other teacher out. He used his breathing ball. We went for a walk to help him shift the energy, and we debriefed. And he was so, like, his face afterwards, he was like, I did it. I did it. I didn't hit. And I was going to hit, and the anger came up, and I started to feel really red zone, but I didn't do it. And so for him, you know, for that child, that change of routine, that change of habit for him, potentially saved him from being expelled from another school, which is incredible. His mum, when we told her later that day, she cried. She said, oh, I cannot believe, because it is life-changing work. But it took time, you know, and subsequently there are other times where it didn't work as well, and he didn't do it, but that's okay. You know, the same as if my habit is I don't want to pour a glass of wine when I've had a stressful day. If I do it and I've had a stressful day, that's okay. If it's a one-off, it's okay. It doesn't mean that old habit's going to come back. It's how we manage it when we've changed it. So it's been having really real conscious about what choices we're making.
So you actually helped him to develop new links in his brain rather than going to the freeze, the fight or flight mode, to actually the more rational area in your mind. And so
Exactly.
you did it by making him aware of his body sensation when he gets into this fight or flight mode. And then you would give him other choice. Of course, after realizing that he's motivated and he really wants to get those reward, as you mentioned before, like the long-term reward.
Behavior is always communication. And it makes me sad, you know, there's so many students in schools that are labelled as, you know, disruptive, expelled, because we're trying to make them fit a round hole. And we're not understanding. And, you know, the good thing is there is a lot more trauma-informed teaching education happening. It's much more common. It's not enough still. We need to be understanding that behaviour is communication. And likewise ourselves, you know, for parents who are listening to this saying, oh, you know, God, you know, I've got some unhealthy habits and I'm really judging myself on that. And, oh, you know, I'm a terrible parent because I do pour and it's not a glass of wine, it's a bottle of wine. And, you know, I haven't exercised for 6 months or 6 years. Like starting with kindness and like meeting ourselves and meeting our kids with kindness and going, this is where we're at. This is the starting point. What is the 1% gain from where I am now? And it doesn't matter that you might be a million miles away from where you want to be ideally. Don't aim there. have that as your end goal, by all means. Have your 1% gain. What's the first thing you want to do? So I'll give my example again. Last week, I would love to have been out running every day for an hour. Did I today feel a bit more sluggish and a bit more, yucky because I hadn't done that all week? Yeah, I did. I didn't feel amazing this morning because I've been out of my habit and my routine because of being away with work. What do? I get back onto it today. I didn't want to get up this morning, but okay, I know what makes me feel good. So meeting ourselves with kindness, and if we go 1% backwards, if we don't do what we want to do for a day or a couple of days or even a week or months or however long, going forward, what's the first 1% thing that I can?
I get that. It also comes into being flexible and adjust the habit into something that works well in different settings.
Yeah, exactly. And it has to work for you. I've got a beautiful friend who I love to bits. She runs 10 kilometers 5 times a week. She's amazing. She's incredibly fit, incredibly active. And I used to really aspire, to do that. But it's actually too big a goal for me. And I didn't do any of it. Whereas if I work with where I'm at right now, it feels different. And it feels achievable. And because it feels achievable, hello, reward. You get the reward, it feels good. And so because you've had that reward, I felt really good after I did that yesterday. I'm going to go and do that again.
So it's the little wins that we're looking for in order to be consistent and doing that habit over and over again, routine over and over.
That's it. James Clear talks about the power of habit stacking. So if I'm trying to start a new habit, tapping it onto something I already do, and I already do pretty unconsciously or subconsciously, like where do I want to place my new habit? So for example, my example earlier of my coffee, I kind of tend to go and get a coffee, like it is just something I do. It's a habit. I really enjoy going down there. So I've tapped my mindfulness routine onto that. Other people talk about, I've worked with people who have wanted to, bring more movement into their day, but they're working from home, so they're stuck at their computer. It's like, okay, what do you always do in your day? Oh, my day's really varied. I have calls sometimes I'm doing emails, sometimes I'm doing research. But what do you do every day? Well, I always stop for lunch. Okay. Do you always stop for lunch at the same time? Yeah, more or less. Okay. So when you stop for lunch, before you eat your lunch, if you get up from your computer and out of your office, do your movement then. So that person's now got a yoga mat next to their office desk, and they know I'm going to go get some lunch. I stand up, and it's probably an 8-minute routine that they do. They stand up and they do it. And so they're doing 8 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That's 40 minutes. It's not, a practice that's going to change their yoga practice massively, but they're getting some mindful movement. And because it feels good, some days, naturally, rather than doing 8 minutes, they want to do 15 minutes.
So do you know what? Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. It's a great thing to say if your child is not willing, for example, to have homework done, then other than say you have to make the whole thing, you can just say, let's do 3 minutes or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the other day you would say, so how much time would you like to do? And then they feel really good when they did something. So then they will own their responsibility and they will increase the time of making homework by themselves.
Exactly. Like with homework, being able to do it at a regular time, trying to find a regular place where they do it and a regular time. Again, it helps it to become a habit. And then coming back to the metacognition, kind of helping them to understand, do you know what? It can feel a bit rubbish doing homework. The reason you have homework is that it's helping you to develop self-motivated learning, which is a really important skill, whether you're going to go to university or college or TAFE, or whether you're going to go straight into the world of work. You have to be able to be self-motivated to continue and to work. That's a life skill. So, rather than, but you've just got to do this maths sheet. Maths sheet's really important. It's not about the maths sheet. It's about what's the bigger picture that the maths sheet is doing for us.
Yeah, we also use the term, it helps you grow your mind. And it feels to me like they can vision it. And it makes them like they feel smarter. So even if he solved only 3 math work, which is not a lot, but it makes him feel this win of, I grew my mind.
Yes.
I want to ask you something, actually. We talk a lot about habits in terms of what do you do, like behavior. Is it possible that habit is also the way we think, thoughts that come?
Yeah. Look, so because basically It's a routine of behaviour. So in theory, like behaviour is normally external, but I know from my own learning and my own journey that you can develop habits of either positive self-talk or negative self-talk. So you can, and it's around becoming really conscious in your thinking and creating that pause of a trigger. So there's a trigger, building in that habit of, there's a trigger, just reflect, how's it feeling in my body? Why is it making me feel that? And what can I do about it? So it's not always easy to follow it, but being able to be really conscious can help to do that. But the key thing with that and us being able to have that control over our thoughts and that kind of that real conscious awareness that we all know how great it feels when we're like, we've got the conscious awareness, we're making, really empowered decisions, we feel in flow. So I mentioned earlier, so the prefrontal cortex actually requires a lot of fuel, to function. So way more than the limbic part of our brain. So prefrontal cortex, like your thinking part, your limbic, your emotional, your habit part. So your brain, so positive psychologists have showed that your brain actually needs 30 minutes of exercise a day. That's not 30 minutes a day because I want to lose weight. That's not 30 minutes a day because my friend's doing an hour and I want to try and keep up with her. It's 30 minutes a day because for my brain, for my main processing center, it needs 30 minutes a day. It also needs good quality food and fruit and vegetables and omega-3 oils. And what happens if I'm not fueling my prefrontal cortex? If that's not fueled enough, what will happen is my limbic part of my brain will start to help out and will start to take over more. And I'm not explaining this in scientific terms. I'm making this very visual for people. But of course, and we know from the limbic part of our brain, it's where our memories and our habits and our patterns are stored. And the emotional part of our brain. And we actually need the limbic part of our brain. It's a really important part of our brain. However, my old stories, my old habits, my old emotions, my old reactions are stored here. So if I'm not fueling my prefrontal cortex, what's highly likely to happen is my reactions, my thoughts will become more from the limbic part of my brain and less from my rational part of my brain. Which is why one of the best lessons I ever had was if you don't have time to exercise, if things are too stressful and you don't have time for exercise, make time to exercise double. Because actually it's when that hamster wheel is going and is spinning, that's when it's really, really easy for the old habits to creep in. When we're tired, it can be very easy to say, I don't want to get up and do that. Or, I just want to snooze the alarm. I just want to have that easy to eat thing, like whatever it is. But the more we can be really conscious and fuel our prefrontal cortex, the better it is for us to continue that upward cycle of making conscious choices.
That's so interesting. So that's why also we can be more creative when we're fueling our front cortex.
Yeah, exactly.
I get that. It's like the new link are stronger than the old link.
That's it. And look, I'm 40. It's taken longer to develop that. There's still times where there'll be a trigger and something, and I'll do an old habit, and that's okay. I have to meet myself with kindness with that. But it is where, like, that's a cognition, working with our kids from a young age. It's why Helen and I set up Calmer Kids in the very first place, because we went, if we can teach kids these skills from a young age to understand it's okay to not be okay. If you feel angry, that's okay. But what isn't okay is the reaction and the trigger and the lash out. So what can you do about it? I love the work of the zones of regulation. So they talk about green zone and yellow zone and red zone and blue zone as well. But that's hypoarousal. But being able to really identify, I've gone from green zone to yellow zone. What do I need to do to get back into green zone? And whether it's for kids, whether it's for adults. And it is why starting it young is really powerful. And the more we can integrate it into our day-to-day lives, the easier it is, because we know that when those habits start to develop, they just happen.
It's funny. It just reminds me that my little one tend also to be really overwhelmed and grumpy. So I present him the green, red, and blue zone. And then at some point, and he's 3.5. And so at some point, I looked at him and I was like, it seems you are upset about something. And he was like, yeah, let me show you. And he grabbed this paper and showed me the red zone. And he was like, that's where I am.
And how good, how amazing. And how old is he?
3.5.
At 3.5?
Yeah, it's amazing because it's just instead of experiencing a meltdown and, some kind of aggressive behavior, he has the way to communicate what he feels and, where he's at.
And also, for his self-esteem, like knowing that he feels that emotion isn't him. And I think, there's many of us that have grown up thinking that our emotions, if I'm feeling angry, it's a bad thing. I judge myself for that. It's like, there's actually no judgment with that. There is a reason for that. And that's okay. But what am I going to do to get myself out of it? Even, I see it in schools all the time. You have a lot of teachers who are very, very close to burnout and they're really, really stressed. And there's a lot of reactions. And it's like, what's your first step that you can do about it? Because you can't necessarily change the system you're working in. You can't change that big picture. But what can you change? What can you do every day so that you're able to regulate yourself? So when that trigger's happening, what can you do to help you be able to understand your emotions? And doing it with our kids is amazing. Your little boy's really lucky that he's learning that so young.
Well, I think we couldn't proceed without it. That's the truth.
Yeah.
But that was a great takeaway to understand that even dysregulation is actually a habit.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. And just before we wrap up, I want to ask if you have anything else to add.
My biggest thing I always say when I'm working with anyone is meet yourself and the kids you're working with, whether it's your own or whether it's students, with kindness, and understand that this work is often a journey. Behaviour is always communication. And even feelings for ourselves, if you're feeling rubbish, it's your body's telling you something. And so if you can tune in and create some space, what's it telling me? That can be really powerful. Being able to make the time for this. Life is really busy. Schools are really busy. Parents are really busy. Kids are really busy. But I think for me, I'm really passionate that there's nothing else that's worth making more time for than this. And when we make time for this, all the other stuff thrives, so whether it's in schools and making time to teach these skills to our students, the English and maths will then flourish. The results they'll massively increase. And that's what I experienced when I was deputy principal in the UK with this work. And same for families. If it feels like you're doing too much, if your kids are going to too many clubs, cut something out. We don't have to keep building and building and building. Just because their friends go to 5 different after-school activities, if it suits your family to go to 2 and have, 2 days where you do yoga at home or just have some family connection time at the park, do that. So I think being able to really listen and consult with your family what you need will then help those habits to really meet your needs.
We got that. Well, thank you so much for such an informative conversation and also all the tools you gave us in terms of how to make it easier to establish new habits. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So I know that was one of the longer episodes because Michelle had so much to share with us and she has even more. So if you want to start your 1% change in creating peaceful mind and well-being in your life, have a look in the show note, because in the show note you can find the free mindfulness journal that Calmer Kids have created, and also a special offer, which is only $1 for 7 days for Calmer Kids online. The next episode in 2 weeks will have a special guest talking about sleep therapy. So make sure to tune in because we'll talk about what happens when your kids have nightmares, how many hours a day they should get a sleep, do they need to nap, even if they're 3, 4, or even 6, 7 years old. So make sure to pop in. And once again, share and rate the podcast. It will help with the mission to spread parenting tool and knowledge. So go ahead and share it right here, right now. And lastly, remember to treat yourself and your kids with compassion and curiosity. Bye!